Hey, welcome to another video about the electric Suzuki Sidekick. Today's video I hope to be the first in a series over the next several months or so, discussing components and component selection and kind of the details of some of the parts that I chose for this project. There's a lot that goes into it, obviously, so we'll try and cover the main ones anyway. Today I wanted to talk about what I consider the most important part in a EV conversion project, and that's the donor vehicle. What do you start with? And for everybody, you know, each person has their own reasons for choosing their donor vehicle that they chose. But in general, obviously, I think most people understand, but I'll just make a few points about a general donor vehicle choice. If you've noticed looking around at EV conversions online and what other people have done, you'll see that most of them are older vehicles. There's probably a number of reasons for that, but one of the biggest ones is simplicity. You know, anytime you get into the early 2000s, to especially once you hit 2010 or so, vehicles are just completely computerized, and so as you try to retrofit things and make systems work that are designed to all be integrated with a computer, it's just a lot more difficult versus something like this one here is a 97 Suzuki Sidekick, and anything, you know, late 90s and earlier, depending on what model and what make, is going to be much more analog. You know, they've got electrical systems and they've got control modules and things, but they're more isolated. So like this one had an engine computer, but that just controlled the engine, and it really doesn't care what's happening in the rest of the vehicle. So that's one consideration. Size and shape is another consideration, and this one, of course, for a lot of folks, you'd say, well, that's not a very good EV vehicle because it's a big box. But I'll explain later my reasoning why we ended up with this one. So obviously aerodynamics is important, size and weight are important, and you just really have to design your drive system and your batteries to match that. Unfortunately, at least up to now, there's not a huge amount of do-it-yourself EV components available for large vehicles. The drive system in this one, I think, was rated for up to around 3,000 to 3,500 pound vehicle, depending on how you configured it. And that's about what I've got here. So, you know, to go much bigger, I'd had to go with a dual motor system or something else. I'm not aware of a lot of motors available that they're, you know, capable of driving a much bigger vehicle. But anyway, let's talk about specifically why I chose this one. We really have to go back a long time. When I was in college, I went to engineering school at the University of Idaho, and in those days, my wife and I, we were newlyweds, and we didn't have any money. She went to college at another university about a 45-minute drive away, and in the wintertime things got really snowy up there, so we needed a cheap 4x4 for her to commute with up there that got good gas mileage, didn't cost us a fortune for her to drive. And so right about the time I was graduating from high school, we lucked into a 89 Geo Tracker hardtop. Got it for 1,500 bucks, and I had a few things wrong with it, but I found out really fast working on it just how simple and smart it was built. There was just no frills. Everything was put together the way it intuitively should have been, and it was easy to fix. And it wasn't perfect. We had a few other problems with it over the years that she drove it, but I was able to fix them all with a little toolbox that I had in college, and it was really an amazing little rig. And at the same time, the first couple of years of college for me, I got involved with a team called Future Truck up at University of Idaho, and in those days, Future Truck was a competition among different universities to take. The first one we did was actually a full-size Chevy Suburban. The next one was a Ford Explorer, but take those trucks and convert them to hybrid electrics of some sort and make them more fuel efficient and eco-friendly and all that, which at the time was revolutionary. You know, I don't know the first Prius may have come out by then. I don't know. That was I think the first hybrid electric vehicle on the market. But we were doing it with these huge trucks, and I found out really fast that I was interested in it. It was exciting for me, and I remember thinking a lot about how could I convert this little Geo Tracker that my wife was driving to an electric car. Of course, like I said, we had no money. I had no facility to work on it. So it really just stayed in my head as a dream. And of course, at the time also, there were no do-it-yourself EV parts available at reasonable prices. No one was doing that. Fast forward probably, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, something like that. That vehicle was long gone. We sold it to upgrade to a bigger one. And I got another, this time it was a Chevy badged 2003 Tracker 4-door, just as a commuter vehicle to work and back. And I also took it to the mountains quite a few times because it was a great little off-roader. Totally stock, I didn't modify it at all, but just one of the most reliable vehicles I've ever had, one of my favorite vehicles. Ended up trading it in, selling it to get a pickup truck, but the only thing I didn't like about it was it was a 4-cylinder, and it just had no power on the highway. But otherwise, one of the favorite vehicles I've ever owned. It was really sad to see it go. So then fast forward again another 5 or 10 years. I don't remember exactly how long, but my oldest daughter, I think, was 11 or 12, and I was thinking ahead to realizing that just not too many years she was going to need a high school car. She was going to need to drive. And by that point, the do-it-yourself EV components had come eons ahead, to the point where you could buy AC motors and control systems, lithium batteries, which were, lithium batteries were just barely hitting laptops when I was in college. But now we could buy, used batteries out of wrecked electric cars, or brand new batteries in nice cells that were set up for EVs. Had a little more money, had a garage to work on it. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to do this. I've been thinking about it for 20-something years. I'm going to do it. So then I started thinking, okay, what kind of vehicle do I want to convert? Well, I didn't have to think very long, because I remembered how I loved the design of the little 4x4 trackers and sidekicks, because they're so simple, and yet they're so rugged. And we live in the mountains of Idaho here, and so we have snow in the winter a lot. So I knew we needed a 4x4 or something with a little ground clearance, something that could handle the dirt roads out here. So the little Porsches and VWs and Geo Metros that a lot of people are converting just weren't going to cut it up here. I wanted something safe for my daughter to be able to get around in, and so I started looking for sidekicks and trackers for sale used. And of course, a lot of what's out there by now is just completely destroyed. They're tough little vehicles. They last a long time, but people use them hard. So I had to search for a few months, but eventually came across this one. And this one's it was about an 1.5-hour drive away from me, so I had to talk to the guy quite a bit before I made the trip out to look at it. But the neat thing that happened on this one is, for one thing, it was physically, like cosmetically, and mostly mechanically, it was in the best condition I could have fathomed. I mean, I have not done any body work on it, any paint work on it. This is how I got it. Interior was clean, headliner was all up and intact. There's one little hole in the driver's seat that's actually kind of been patched, so it's no big deal. Back seat was beautiful. Carpets were dirty, but okay. Absolutely clean all the way around. The issue this rig had was the fellow that I bought it from had just recently purchased it to kind of refurb it and use it as a commuter vehicle. He was moving to the mountains also. He wanted a 4x4 to commute to town with. And the problem it had was he told me it was overheating. And he had actually replaced the head gasket in the little 1.8 4-cylinder in it twice, and it was still doing the same thing. And so I test drove it, and sure, it ran great, but I could see the issue pretty quickly. There was some kind of a leak in the head where it was pushing exhaust gases into the cooling system, pressurizing the cooling system, which would push all the coolant out to the reservoir tank, and pretty soon there wasn't enough circulating and it would get hot. So that brings up a point that I didn't bring up earlier, but I should have. In general, when you're looking for a donor vehicle, something that at least runs and drives is a really big bonus. And that was the great thing about this is, yeah, I couldn't drive it real far without stopping and pouring coolant back into the radiator. But it did run and drive, which allowed me to test it a bunch. I drove it for several months just around the valley here close by. And that way I was able to verify with good confidence that the steering was good, the suspension was good, the transmission, the transfer case, bearings, all the interior accessories, all that stuff was good. I think I had to fix this one window switch. One power window didn't work. Other than that, everything worked. But if it hadn't, I would have found out in that period of time and been able to know what I had on my list to take care of whenever I tore it all down. The other thing the guy had done was put brand new all-terrain tires on it, brand new brakes on it. He had done a lot of work to it, planning on using it as a commuter. So all that was already done. But because the engine was overheating, he gave it to me for $700. I mean, the tires alone were worth almost that. So we really, really lucked out to get a low-cost donor vehicle that was in great condition for what I needed, because, of course, the first thing I did when it was time to start working on it was yank the engine out. And, you know, I never did find out exactly what the problem was with that engine. I sold it along with every other part I pulled out of here in a big pile to a guy for $150 just to get rid of it. So, you know, other reasons for this one, I thought about doing a two-door trackers and sidekicks, or even lighter. This one weighs, well, in its gas engine, you know, original format, it weighed just under 3,000 pounds. The little two-doors go something like 2,300. They are really, really lightweight. I was concerned for a couple reasons about doing a two-door. Number one, I thought my daughter would probably want the bigger space of a four-door to drive around town. And also, I was concerned at first that I would need more real estate for batteries than a two-door would give me. Now, as it turned out, I ended up putting all the batteries either under the hood or where the gas tank goes in the back end, and I think a two-door would have been exactly the same. So I probably could have done this exact same conversion on a two-door, which would have been even lighter, you know, got a little more range, a little better performance, all that, but not near as much room inside. But anyhow, so that's why I chose the four-door. I wasn't dead set on this sport trim with all the plastic cladding and all that stuff. If you know Suzuki's, a regular Sidekick would not have all this fender flare and plastics on the sides. But and if I could have found one of those in the condition and the situation this one was in, I would have taken it, because this is just kind of extra fluff. But it works okay. There's nothing. So far, none of it's falling off. There's been a few spots start to separate. One spot's got a screw in it, but we live with it. So I'll just take you around and show you a few things that are important about these little Suzukis and why I chose one. So to start with here, I don't know how well you'll be able to see, but this is a body-on-frame truck-style construction. So if you look in there, you can see there is actually a steel frame underneath this vehicle. I have no idea if you'll be able to see very well up under there, but to me that was fairly important, not just because it makes it more rugged for bouncing around these dirt roads, but also because a steel frame under the vehicle gives you a lot of great places to mount things like motors. I ended up having to put an additional cross member in this one because I deleted the transmission. So I was able to bolt that right to the frame rails. If this thing had been a unibody construction without a steel frame, I might have had a lot harder time finding a sturdy enough place to mount that cross member to hold the motor in there. Another thing that's important about these little rigs, if you don't know, is that they have a true old-fashioned transfer case for four-wheel drive. And this one I did actually modify and put what's called a twin stick kit on it. So but part of the reason I wanted something with a full-on transfer case is because I decided pretty early on I wanted to delete the transmission, but I still wanted a lower gear for climbing hills or descending steep hills. And I knew, of course, a real transfer case has 2 speeds, a high range and a low range. So that, you know, this Suzuki Sidekick platform gave me that. Now this twin stick kit allows me to independently shift between 2 and 4-wheel drive and high and low range. So I had to add stickers here. So forward is 4-wheel drive, back is 2-wheel drive, and then right now it's in low range because I'm just here in the driveway, but got neutral there and high range. Also, great thing about neutral on this transfer case, and I'm about to use it because I'm about to move across the country here and tow this thing flat all the way to Arkansas. But this allows you to flat tow without spinning the motor. And of course, if you had a stick shift with neutral, you could do that as well. But this transfer case, being in neutral, the only parts that will be turning while we're flat towing are the rear axle and the drive shaft. And that brings me to another point about 4-wheel drive in this vehicle. It did not actually come with them. It had automatic front locking hubs, which are semi-reliable, but there was a lot of aftermarket manual hub options available for not very much money. So that was, I think, maybe the very first thing I did to this. Well, I had to replace the back seat belts because their dog had chewed on them. But in any case, I put these manual hubs on this thing really quick right after I got it. And that allows us to make sure 100% that when we're in 2-wheel drive, we're not turning any of the front drivetrain, not wasting any energy on that. And then when we go in 4-wheel drive and lock those in, we know for sure they are locked and we do have 4-wheel drive. What else is important about these little rigs? Let's take a look under the hood. I know if you've watched my other videos, you've seen that before, but we'll just take a look and I can point out a couple of other things. So as you can see, this one actually now, you can see the steering shaft down in there and the steering box just right down below that vacuum reservoir that I added. It's one of the nice things about these little Sidekicks is there were a bunch of the 2-door models especially built with manual steering back in the day. So I was able to take the power steering box out of this one and replace it with a manual steering box, so I could completely eliminate all the plumbing and all the extra weight and complexity of power steering. This little rig is still light enough that with manual steering it's not too difficult. The only thing I ran into, and take note of this if you are considering a Suzuki Sidekick conversion from power steering to manual steering, if you look, let me try to get out of the way there. Right back here you can see there's something a little unique in that steering shaft. That is an extension I had to create using some long bolts and pieces of tubing, because the manual steering box requires a longer steering shaft than the power steering box. So I had to extend that steering shaft. If I'd had a welder and some more fabrication abilities, I could have just cut that steering shaft and welded a tube onto it, but I didn't have any of that, so I improvised and made it longer my own way. And so far I had 0 problems with that. It's worked great. What else about these little Suzukis? You know, everything in here is pretty accessible, with the exception of heater core. That's buried inside the dash, and that was a bit of a pain in the butt. That's the only thing I'll complain about when it comes to working on these little Suzukis, is if you have to get to anything inside the dash, up underneath the dash, that is a pretty difficult process to get that whole thing torn out and work under there. This one actually came with a wiring harness already in it for flat towing. It had a bad relay in it, so I replaced the little relay. But otherwise it was pretty much ready for flat towing, and I think it had been towed at some point. I replaced the bumper on it with this real simple sheet metal job here, and then bought a generic universal tow bar and welded the brackets on and bolted them. They're both bolted and welded here. So this one's ready to flat tow. I have flat towed it a couple of times just to take it farther than the range would allow, and it works just fine. Another nice thing about these little Suzukis, we'll see if we can get a view of it here. I don't have a lift, so it's really hard to show you things underneath, but we're going to tilt over sideways here a little bit. So this back here that you're looking at is the fuel tank skid plate holding one of my battery modules. These little rigs have a nice sturdy steel skid plate under the fuel tank with tube steel on the sides bolted right up to the frame. Makes a great place to put some batteries. These Chevy Volt batteries, I'd hope to put 2 modules back here. Unfortunately, they're just bulky enough and there's really no flexibility in the size or configuration of them, so I only ended up with 1. But I basically was just able to clamp it down onto that fuel tank skid plate, and it makes a great mounting point for that. What else? I don't think there's a whole lot else. I mean, we can just look in here in the back end. With the 4-door, even with the back seats up, you've got, I don't know what that is, probably almost 2 feet of floor space back here for storage. Plenty of room. Oh, another nice thing about these little rigs, they're old enough that they have a manual, not manual, I should say mechanical speedometer cable. So the speedometer and the odometer still work just as they always did, running on a cable off the transfer case. So that's still operational. That's about the only part of the gauge cluster that still works. I did not go to all the effort to try to wire in the battery state of charge to the fuel gauge or the motor speed to the tachometer or any of that. Really not necessary unless you just, you know, want to kind of dress it up. This one actually did have AC. Very few of these Suzukis had AC, but this one did. I did eliminate it. I just didn't want the extra complexity, and up here we barely need it during only the hottest part of the year. Where we're headed in Arkansas, we'll probably be wishing for it a little more, but that would have been a lot of extra weight, a lot of extra parts to try and make AC work in the EV. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I covered quite everything there, but if you have any questions, you know, send me a comment down below, or however you want, and we'll try to get them answered. And then hopefully in a few months or so, we'll come out with another video on another component. I don't do these super often because, frankly, nowadays my daughter has it out. She drives it every day now, so I don't even have the vehicle at home a lot of the time. But I just happened to snag it today. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you have a good one.